Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Now this is a series that I have a long history with because I was a big fan of the books when I was growing up, and when they were turned into movies I was so excited to see the film adaptations of them, and I love those first two books, and in turn I love those first two movies. And you know, Mockingjay was kind of the reason why I stopped reading books. It was just such a boring book. I fell asleep every single time I was looking at that page, and I still fall asleep every time I try to hold a book, which is actually pretty sad, and I blame Mockingjay entirely for that. But those Mockingjay movies were just okay, I guess. So I was excited to return to Pan Am to this series because I did enjoy that new book that this film is based off of quite a bit. Honestly, to a point where if I were to decide, I think that this book is actually my second favorite in the series underneath Catching Fire, and so I was very excited to see this being turned into a film. But I've seen a lot of reviews for this movie online, and not a lot of people have actually read the book that are talking about this movie. So let's talk about this movie in terms of an adaptation from that book that I did really enjoy, and let's talk about full spoilers for this whole thing. So if you've not read the book or the movie, I'm going to be getting to spoilers and specific details into this story, so let's just jump right into it. This movie is broken up into three different parts, first of which is called The Mentor. This is of course going to be the introduction to our main character in this story, named Coriolanus Snow, who eventually becomes President Snow in the future movies. And with your preconceived notion of who this character is, both in the movies and in the books that originally came out, so, you know, this is a guy that is a very, very terrible person. He's running this world. He has a passion for these Hunger Games, and he's very desperate to try to kill Katniss because of the uprising that she is causing in this world. And so to go back to when he was younger in this world is actually an interesting one, because he's not exactly how you'd expect him to be when he's at this age, because he's not at a high status in the capital at this point in his life. He's honestly a lower class citizen within the capital. Even though he still has a lot of resources of him being in the capital, he's not seen as, you know, a lower class citizen or a lesser human being like they are viewing the people in the district. So he still has that, you know, that capital mentality to him, but he's not like the other capital people that have all the money and resources. This is also at a point where the Hunger Games are not what we expect them to be. When the tributes are taken from their districts and they're put on that train ride up to the capital, it's not this lavish thing where they're given all these food and treated like spectacles once they get to the capital, and everybody loves them and everybody's rooting for them to win the Hunger Games. They're placing bets, they're sending, you know, these items into the arena to give them food or as like all these different donations, or they're taking bets on these tributes. It's not like that whatsoever. This is a point in the Hunger Games after 9 years, the 10th year of these games, where people have kind of stopped watching the games because of its brutality. And you have this character named Dr. Gaul, played by Viola Davis, who wants to make the Hunger Games a spectacle. She wants to make it as entertainment so people keep watching it, so the games keep on going in this world. You even get to see CASCA Highbottom, who is the creator of the Hunger Games, played by Peter Dinklage. Brilliantly, by the way. I think that Viola Davis and Peter Dinklage are probably the two best cast members in this entire movie, because I find them to be very interesting characters in terms of the creation of the Hunger Games, from what they were at this point in time to what they're going to be later on in the series. But I really think that this is one of the best prequel stories that I've seen in media like this, in terms of how it recontextualizes information that you learn in those later movies and books that have, you know, all this history to them, and you get to see why Snow has such disdain for Katniss and that Hanging Tree song, and how the Hunger Games became the thing that it is, and how President Snow at that time asked the question of what are the Hunger Games for, and how he kind of gained that mentality. Because in here he is painted as a somewhat sympathetic character, but in the book especially you get to see his inner monologue, where he essentially has this devil and angel on his shoulders pushing him towards either selfishness or selflessness in terms of being the mentor to Lucy Gray Baird, played by Rachel Ziegler in this film. Now Lucy Gray is a very interesting character for me in this story, because I kind of conflicted with her character to begin with, and I don't think that Rachel Ziegler's accent in this movie helps all too much with my conflicted nature with this character, because I think it can be distracting at times. I think overall she does a good job bringing this character to life, because this is an extremely faithful adaptation of this book, almost to a fault, where they're trying to cram all this information into this movie, and it can feel a bit overwhelming, and feel like the first two acts are trying to race through this story, and even the third act is trying to race through this story, where it kind of feels a little bit narratively unsatisfying by the ending, unless you have read the book, and to have all those more intimate details with these characters. And so, you know, I think Ziegler is doing exactly what she needs to do to portray this character. But my main issue with this character in general is the fact that I kind of wish that she was playing Snow just as much as Snow was playing her in this story. In the later years of the Hunger Games, where you got to see Katniss's version of the Hunger Games, you get to see that the mentors are just previous winners of the Hunger Games. But at this point in the story, there hasn't been 24 winners to be had in the Hunger Games. This is the 10th annual Hunger Games at this point. And so all the mentors are taken as these high school students are about to graduate. And one of these students is going to win the Plinth Prize, which is essentially going to help them get into college. And Snow really wants this because, like I said, he's not at a high status in the capital at this point in his life. He doesn't have all the money in the world to go to a university. And so that's kind of more the devil on his shoulder, trying to win these games, trying to help, this Lucy Gray girl win these games out of selfishness because he wants to win this prize. He wants to gain money. He wants to gain power in this world. Whereas the angel on his shoulder is kind of being endeared towards this girl, kind of seeing her as a human, like a pretty low bar for this character. But there's a love story in here between Lucy Gray and Snow. And as somebody who has read the book, there's several moments in this first act where he makes a decision where I know, because I read the books, that this is actually a selfish decision. This is not him doing these things out of the love of Lucy Gray. This is an actual selfish decision. So I think some people are walking out of this movie feeling conflicted about having sympathy for Snow's character. And I think that is kind of the point of this movie, is for you to feel conflicted about Snow, seeing that he has some sympathetic qualities to him. But when you get into his head and you get to see his true intentions in the book, he becomes a more interesting character, because you see that all these things, these lies and deceptions, are being put towards Lucy Gray. And I wish that Lucy's character kind of saw through all the lies and deceptions, and not just at the ending of this story, but earlier on in the story. And I think some of the big moments in the first act especially, and kind of leading into the second act as well, feel a little less impactful as it did in the books, because there's so much information being crammed into these first two acts, where it seems like the movie is just on a race to tell its story, just trying to get out as much information as quickly as possible, that you lose the impact of like the bomb going off in the arena and killing a bunch of the tributes and a bunch of the other mentors in the story. You don't feel the impact of that one tribute killing her mentor, by the zoo cages. You don't really feel the impact of that, almost kiss, or that first kiss that they have between Snow and Lucy Gray before going into the actual arena. And so I think some of these moments, when it comes to the love story and how impactful that was in the book, and kind of the bigger moments like the explosion or some of those things, don't feel as impactful, because we're kind of racing through these character moments, and we don't get to be as endeared to these characters as we were in the books, because we're racing through. And I think the only thing that was really cut from these first act was this other mentor and Snow were tasked to, I guess, write this paper on how these sponsorships were going to work, because at this point Snow pitched the sponsorships to have people be endeared to these people in the arena, to want to send gifts to them inside the arena with these drones. And so there's that whole subplot with that, where he has to write this paper and present it to Dr. Gaul. And the other girl was too distraught because that other mentor was killed by her tributes earlier in the day, and so she wasn't a part of that writing process. But of course she wants to take the credit for it anyway, and so she reaches down into the pit of snakes to try to grab that paper. But of course, if those snakes kind of have the scent of somebody, it's not going to attack those people, because it is used to that smell. And of course, she didn't write the paper, so she's attacked by the snake. In the book, she gets very disfigured and morphed, and Snow is absolutely mortified by what Dr. Gaul does here. And you never get a sense of Snow feeling terrified of who Dr. Gaul is, even though he kind of becomes Dr. Gaul later on in this series. And so I kind of wish that I had that impact in this movie, because that informs Snow's character a lot in the books. But let's get into the actual games themselves, because of course all these characters are going to get thrown into the arena to fight to the death. And the arena is actually a good one. I like it a lot. It's a very small arena in terms of how it eventually, blows up and becomes this big thing later on in the series. It's basically just an actual arena, like a Coliseum type thing, where all the tributes are going to be thrown in there. And at this point, the Hunger Games don't usually last more than a day. Usually the people kind of die off fairly quickly. They don't get to a point where they starve to death, or they have to outlive the other ones just by natural resources like they are in the later versions of the games. It's this small contained arena, but when the bombs go off in the arena, it pokes all these holes in the floors for room for them to kind of hide, to try to survive, like to outlive all the other people in the arena, which is a good idea to expand this arena into more than what it was at face value. And so when you have the arena actually start and you have the action sequences shot with a lot of wide angle lenses, it's very enthralling. I do think that the Hunger Games, the actual arena sequences in all the movies, are the most interesting parts of all of these films. And this is only the second act of the film, and so the Hunger Games were actually kind of the shortest parts of the actual book itself in terms of those 3 sections. But the movie gives a decent amount of time to explore these things. The only changes that I really saw in these moments were the fact that there were cameras down in those tunnels, because in the actual book, they don't have the security cameras in there because they weren't expecting to need cameras down there, because the arena wasn't supposed to blow up. And so you get to see some things in this movie that you don't get to see inside of the book, like what Lucy Gray and Jessup are up to down underneath the caves. And I think some of the most effective moments in this series in general is when you get to see the people stand up against the Capitol in an act of rebellion. This movie also has a moment like that in this film, similar to Katniss and Peeta about to eat the berries at the end of their Hunger Games to show an unintentional act of rebellion against the Capitol, trying to let one of them kill the other. They'd rather both of them die than have somebody else die and the other one live without them. And so it's an act of rebellion in a very great way. Or when Rue dies, the people of District 11 kind of rioting in the streets against the peacekeepers. It's a very uplifting and kind of rousing moment in the movie where you're kind of energized to see these people rising up against their oppressors, essentially. And this movie has a moment where Tributes is mourning the loss of their fellow Tributes from their district, and they go up, they drag all the bodies to the center of the arena, and they put the flag over all the bodies. And I love that moment so much. I think that moment in the book was very, very powerful, and it's very powerful in this as well. I think one moment that wasn't nearly as powerful was when you have that one Tribute from District 2 strung up, because after the explosion in the arena, he kind of ran out and escaped. And in the book, you're wondering where this person went, this Tribute that is connected to Sejanus' past, which we'll get into Sejanus later on in the video. But when the arena starts, you get to see he is literally strung up at the top of the arena in a very dark and disturbing manner. And that's exactly what happens here in this movie. But there wasn't as much time in between the explosion of the Capitol to seeing him strung up here to have that impact in this moment. And so I didn't feel as much of an impact with that moment, but it still was impactful in the story in general. So it was nice to see that being adapted onto the screen. But in general, I think the games themselves were very faithful to what they were inside of the book, and it was a very exciting moment in this movie. And when the games do end, and when Lucy Gray is up on the screen singing while all the snakes are kind of surrounding her in this moment, I love to see that moment, and to see Snow's journey throughout the games, of him, subtly cheating throughout the entire thing, giving Lucy Gray the rat poison, and seeing Lucy use that rat poison against the wrong person was a very tragic and heartbreaking scene. And to see, him being desperate to get that piece of the handkerchief into the snake pit in order for them to gain a sense of familiarity with her scent, in order for them to not kill her in the arena. I thought that was also a very great moment to see, that conflict in Snow's character. As an audience, you're looking at this like, did he do that out of love for Lucy Gray, or did he do that to win the games in order to get that Plinth prize? And that is the parts of this character that is so fascinating to me, because you wonder those things. And at least with my perspective, reading the book, he definitely did that out of selfishness. But really, there's not too much in this second act that I think was all that bad. I actually really did enjoy the second act in terms of how it was adapted from the book to the movie. I did really like how exciting it was. It was a very thrilling sequence. I think my only downfalls with this section is the fact that I wish there was 15 more minutes in that first act to set up more character moments, like the relationship and the love story between Snow and Lucy Gray. I kind of wish I felt that a little bit more like I felt it in the book, and be as conflicted as the story wants you to be with whether or not Snow is doing these things out of love or out of selfishness. I wanted to feel that a bit more. I wanted to feel the friendship between Sejanus and Snow at this point in the movie as well, because there's a moment where Sejanus goes into the arena to kind of tribute his tribute in a way after he had died, after he was strung up in the arena. And this is a character with Sejanus that's, he's from District 2. He's not from the capital, and so he has a lot of empathy for the people in the districts, and he's fighting up against Dr. Gaul. He stands up in class and kind of argues against her of why the Hunger Games should not be a thing anymore, why they should stop doing these things, and why the war is over. And you can definitely tell that this character does not belong with the capital whatsoever. And one of the most enthralling parts of the book and in the movie is to see Snow having to go inside of the arena itself to save Sejanus, to really save himself, because this is kind of all his fault with this friendship being formed, and the only person that Sejanus trusts is Coriolanus Snow, whether or not Snow wants that trust from him or not, which he definitely does not want the burden of his friendship, even though Sejanus feels this friendship from Snow in a sort of way. And so all that stuff was extremely effective to see Snow actually actually in that arena, and to go down to that, basic animal instinct of him killing the other tributes and how it's kind of brushed under the rug by the game maker. All that stuff was really great. But again, I do wish that friendship between Sejanus and Snow was a little bit more impactful in that first act, to make me believe that Sejanus had so much trust in Snow, to believe that of anybody in the entire world, Snow would be the one to talk Sejanus out of that arena. I wish that had a bit more impact as well. And just as I was shocked reading the book at this moment, you get to see the Hunger Games end extremely early on in the movie. And I think if anybody has not read the book, they'll be very much taken aback by how early the Hunger Games end in this story, and how the last hour of this film is almost a completely different story in general. It's kind of pulling the rug out from underneath the audience. And I think some people will be very disconnected with this storyline completely and not have that impact because you haven't read the book. And I think a lot of people are having issues with this last act because it feels like it drags on a bit too much. But if you have read the book, you know its actual purpose and its impact. So I didn't feel that's, the rug was pulled out from underneath me. I do think that it does slow down significantly at this point in the movie, but it's by design. It's exactly how the book was. And I do think I had that feeling while I was reading the book of it being like, oh wow, we're really, really slowing down here to kind of establish brand new characters and to establish a brand new storyline that is completely separate from what we've seen so far. At this point in the story, Snow has been kicked out of the capital, essentially. He was blamed for cheating in the Hunger Games, and CASCA Highbottom, played again excellently by Peter Dinklage, gets a great moment at saying to Snow that this is what you deserve. You're being sent to the place that you hate the most. You will never have any status in the capital because of all these things, and you're going to be sent to District 8 to live out the rest of your life as a peacekeeper. And this is absolutely crushing to Snow, and I think this is why he has that decision to go to District 12 instead of District 8, is in order to be with Lucy Gray. And this is his fallback option. If he doesn't get, the Plinth prize, what does he have in his life besides Lucy Gray? And so again, I don't think any of the decisions that he made for Lucy Gray was out of selflessness, was out of love for this character. She was always a backup plan for him, which is just a disgusting thing from this character. You get to see the seeds of who this character will be in the future scattered throughout the entirety of this movie. And so I've heard some reviews saying that the last act of this movie is trying to race to see Snow become a bad guy. I think he was a bad guy the entire time, but I think that is mainly because of all the knowledge that I have with his inner monologues inside of the book itself. But really, this last act gives you a look at who Snow would be in the districts as a peacekeeper, as somebody who is almost willing to run away with Lucy Gray into the woods because, he gets into this conflict of Sejanus, going up against all these rebels in District 12, and he's, kind of forming a rebel plot to help a prisoner escape and to run off into the woods with themselves. And Sejanus, again, in the books, was a lot more of an interesting character than he was in this movie. And again, that friendship was a lot more complicated, but still, I do love the performance that is given by the actor who plays Sejanus. Andrés Rivera was also in West Side Story with Rachel Ziegler as well. And I think they're a couple in real life, which is kind of nice to see. But in general, I did really like his role in this story. And I just wish there was more time dedicated to this. I heard a lot of people say that they wish that this was a miniseries. Honestly, if this was like a 6 to 8 episode miniseries, that would have been absolutely perfect. I do think that 15 more minutes of development with both Lucy Gray and Snow's character, and Snow and Sejanus' character in that first act would have helped a lot for this last section of the movie. But as it stands, yes, this last act of the movie does slow down significantly, but I found it to be a nice change of pace because I thought the first two acts were kind of racing through the movie with so much information of plot, progression, that it kind of felt exhausting at times. So I kind of enjoyed the film actually taking its time to slow down and to sit with these characters. If anything, I think that this last act of the movie is paced exactly how the book is paced. And I think in terms of an adaptation, it felt the most accurate in terms of the pacing, in terms of how the story is unraveled. And I thought that the story that they're trying to tell in this last act of this story of how far Snow will go to get back to that point in power, I do think that is extremely effective. I think one of the most effective parts of this last act is when Snow decides to record with a Jabberjay the conversation that he has with Sejanus, essentially betraying this person that had so much trust in Snow, this guy who was extremely naive in trusting Snow and trusting a better human nature out of this character who's been lying and deceiving to him essentially throughout his entire life. And again, that sort of stuff is knowledge that I have from the books, which is why I think that moment was as effective for me as an audience member. But I loved that moment here in the movie. I thought it was one of the most impactful moments. And when he was brought up to the hanging tree, it was an absolutely crushing moment. I love the Jabberjays repeating his cries out to his mom in this moment, which is just a heartbreaking moment to see this character that actually had a heart in the Capitol to go out to volunteer to be a peacekeeper, to just be betrayed by his friend in this moment. You also get a more direct focus on the love story between Snow and Lucy Gray in these last scenes of the movie. And again, I think if their relationship was formed a little bit better in those first two acts, make you believe that this was a more genuine relationship, I think that this would have been a little more impactful. The moment that I was waiting for them to adapt in this story was the ending, because the ending of the book is very vague. It leaves up to the audience. It's a mystery of what happens to Lucy Gray, and that's exactly what they do in this movie. And I think it has left some people to be narratively unsatisfied with the ending of this story because of how Lucy just kind of disappears at the end of this movie. But if you listen to the lyrics of the songs that she sings, it kind of shows a lot more into her character. And I think the book does a good job giving you insights into the lyrics of those songs as Snow kind of thinks about it in his inner monologue to kind of show what he's thinking at every given moment. So if you pay attention to these songs that she sings, they have a lot more meaning than you might think at face value. But I honestly think it's an extremely poetic ending, especially, digging into the lyrics of that song of Lucy Gray disappearing into the forest and how poetic it is that she actually did disappear into the forest. And I think that her songs kind of have this clairvoyance aspect to them, because the Hanging Tree song is something that will haunt Snow for the rest of his life, especially when Katniss sings it on screen in an act of, propaganda for the rebellion. Again, it adds all this context to these songs, to these characters, and to Snow's motivations and why he hates Katniss so passionately in those later movies, especially in Mockingjay, that recontextualizes it in a positive manner. And so I did like this ending quite a bit. I love the ambiguity in terms of what happened to Lucy Gray, and I'm glad that they didn't answer it as like, oh, somebody in Mockingjay in District 13 is Lucy Gray, and now we know what happened to her. I'm glad that we don't know what happened to Lucy Gray. But in the end, Snow gets exactly what he wants. He was the one who killed the mayor's daughter in District 12. He was willing to run away with Lucy Gray because he thought that those guns were going to be found, that he was going to be caught for all these things. But when he gets his hands on those guns, you get to see in his eyes that's, kind of his mind stirring, his mind thinking that he can get away with this murder, that he can go back home, that he can, gain power again in the Capitol. And that's exactly what he does by the ending of the film. And he goes all the way to the Capitol. He goes up to Dr. Gaul, and she asks him one final time, what are the Hunger Games for? And I think that is one thing that this movie does extremely well, that I think Mockingjay and some of the other Hunger Games don't do as well, as explain what the Hunger Games are actually for. Because if you throw all these people in this arena, they're going to go down to the most common denominator of who they are as people, as human, which is animals, essentially. They're going to kill each other and lie and cheat and do anything that they can to survive. And that's exactly what happens to people in this world. And without the Hunger Games, then the real world is going to turn into that. And the real world is going to turn into a place where people are going to fight amongst each other and kill each other until one person remains. And it's a reminder of who people are at the core, which is, again, a very dark and twisted perspective to have. But that is essentially what Dr. Gaul kind of groomed him to believe in this story. And so in a very dark and twisted way, I think that this prequel series really does give an answer to why the Hunger Games exist and why it is the way that it was when Katniss Everdeen is volunteering as tributes all those years later. It is a reason why President Snow is as despicable as who he is in those later films. I do think that as a prequel, especially with the book, it does paint this picture of what this world is and how it became what it is later on. And I think as a prequel, it does extremely well. And as a film adaptation with a little bit more time, maybe as a miniseries, I think it would have excelled to be something truly amazing. As it stands, I do think it's missing just enough for me not to like it as much as those original two movies, but I do like it more than the Mockingjay films. I loved all the casting in this movie. Peter Dinklage as the creator of the Hunger Games, who created it as a drunken joke that was twisted into reality. I loved seeing Dr. Gaul's twisted perspective on what the Hunger Games were actually for. I loved seeing Lucky Flickerman also having his lighthearted jokes, throwing it in as the host of the Hunger Games. And of course, TIGRIS, played by Hunter Schafer, who I wish we had a lot more of her complicated relationship with slowly seeing who Snow really was, who her cousin truly was in this world. And of course, Tom Blyth as this character, and as somebody who understands his motivations in the book, it just made his arc in this film just that much better for me. But if you haven't read the book, I do see a lot of holes in this story that makes you, I guess, not fully get into this story as much. Or even if you have read the book, it might make you feel like you wish you saw all these other things and feel like you're missing all these things from a story that you love. And I can also understand that perspective as well. But that's going to be it for my review for The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Are you in the camp that I'm in, where as somebody who has read the books, it kind of elevated this movie for you in terms of its entertainment value? Or are you somebody who also read the books who thought the entertainment value of this movie was lessened because of the things that were missing from the books? Or are you somebody who hasn't read the books at all, that just enjoyed or did not like the movie on its own merits? I'm very curious to hear all your thoughts in the comment section down below, especially with this film. I think the conversation around it being a more controversial movie in the Hunger Games franchise, I think this is an even more interesting conversation to have. So if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel as well to see more reviews just like this one. And as always, you can check out the other videos that I have here on the channel. I just reviewed the Marvels, I just reviewed Loki, and a bunch of other stuff are here on the channel, along with all the future reviews that I'll do later on in this channel. So thanks guys for watching this video, and I hope to see you all in my next one.